grew up in Illinois, Plainfield, Illinois. I went to Illinois State University for my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, graduating in 1979. I studied with Harold and Ken and Rod Carswell and, you know, all the principal actors there. And right away after graduating, with my BFA, I went to New York City and settled there for about 5 years, and I had a loft, and that's where I really, I was in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, which back then was a very violent and very cheap. So violence and cheap often go together. And so I rented a 2,000 square foot loft for only $175 a month. And I was able to work part-time. I also married Wilbur about that time, and she's a nurse, and so that also allowed me to work part-time. So I worked part-time as an electrician and did my paintings there. And that's really, I feel like I never had a real show or anything when I was there, but I just worked. And it was that experience, those 5 years in Brooklyn, that convinced me that art making was not just like a hobby or a pretend thing, but a real thing to do as a person. So it was pretty much those years that got me to commit to a lifetime of doing this. Then a friend of mine told me that I was grousing about living in the city with a person I was working for, and he said, "You'd be perfect graduate school material." And I was like, really? I never thought about going to get my MFA. And so about the same time, Wilbur and I were deciding to move out of Brooklyn. And so we saw a story about Madison, Wisconsin in a magazine, and we thought, that's a great place to live. It looks really cool. So we ended up moving there. And while we were planning on moving, this guy told me they have a great grad program there, so you should apply for grad school. So I applied. It was the only school I ever applied to. I applied like 2 or 3 months past the deadline, but they still let me in. So I started grad school in '85, and then got out of there in '88 or '89. And then I got a teaching position at Minnesota State University in Mankato, Minnesota, and I taught there for 32 years. I taught painting and drawing, and I never wanted to teach. When I got out of undergrad, I kind of hated school. I was just tired of it. And I also felt like that commitment of being an artist, of living an artist's life, didn't have much to do with the academic life either. It had to kind of being in the community, working with real people in a sense, and and so I kind of carried that disdain for academic life throughout my whole 32-year career. Now I succeeded in academia. I got all my promotions and all that crap, but I always kind of held the whole teaching of art at that level kind of at arm's length for some reason. I don't know why. Now, I feel like now I just dissed my entire 32 years of teaching at a university. But what I'm trying to say is I think that attitude really helped me be a very good teacher. It was an attitude that I got from my teachers at Illinois State. I could tell they were doing their teaching because they were doing their art, not the other way around. And that's how I always tried to hold that at the center of my commitment to the whole idea of being an artist and making art. Well, two Harolds and a Ken. I didn't study. I studied mainly with Ken Holder and Harold Gregg. I didn't study at all with Harold Boyd, but I was aware of his work and was influenced by his work as well as I think most everybody was. But working with Ken and Harold. Sorry. Might have to edit that part. I'm like trying to think of what to say. Anyway, they were extremely, well, I think it gets back to that whole idea of them modeling the life of what an artist is to me as a young person. You know, I came from Plainfield, it's up near Joliet. I spent a lot of time going to the Art Institute, so I had this idea, this sort of vision about art based on going to the museum, and it's something that I loved. I mean, I was like, these are really cool things. I didn't know much about them, but I thought they were cool. And when I came here to study, that sort of initial kind of very basic, raw excitement was refined, was cultivated, was encouraged, was questioned, was developed by those two artists. A lot of times through what they told me, and it's like weird because when you think back on your education as an artist, there's not much that, at least I remember specifically. It's not like you remember, oh, this person taught me how to do this or this or this. It's more like there's like kind of an ambient education going on or something, where there's just in the studio talk. I remember Ken sitting there playing the guitar, you know, and I thought that was cool. And then, and of course everybody's smoking like crazy, and they just seem to live creative lives. And that's, I think, what they really taught me, was how to live a creative life and how to be joyful, you know, in your creativity, because they didn't seem like they were like, you know, the suffering artists at all. How to try to, I mean, this might sound crazy, but how to try to sell your art. I mean, that was Harold's big thing. He was really, but he was very encouraging in the idea that you can make this real. You can actually make money on this, you can make a living, you can have a life, and you can even bite the hand that feeds you. You know, so, and I think that's a really good lesson. One of the most important things he told me, though, I remember we were in he had a graduate level seminar, and I was an undergrad, but he invited me to come to that. He said, apply for grants. And it was the first time I ever heard that idea of artist grants in my life. I had no clue. And just that one phrase he said got me like thinking about it. Years later, I started applying for grants, and you know, that I got a lot of them. But, so just those kind of things. I don't know, it's not like and I took Harold for the art history class, and he was just an amazing art history teacher because he taught it from a perspective of a painter. And so you could just hear how he described the painting, almost like he was making it, or how he, you know, so there's all kinds of little snippets that float up from that class that still, you know, I don't know how many, 40 years later or something, still affect the way I think about my own painting. So, or how I even look at painting. So I think, you know, the idea of them, you know, modeling an artist's life, and that whole, like I said earlier about, I never felt they were teachers at all. I mean, obviously we were functioning within a system where I was defined as a student and they were a teacher, but I always felt that they were some kind of peers, and they were just more experienced peers than me, and they were willing to share that experience with me. And that's just a very, I think that's a very fundamental, important concept that a lot of students in other disciplines never get. You know, they just get their degree and move on. But they truly gave me a great gift that I'm still cherishing. So yeah. Well, it's similar like when you're a student, you can make work for the class assignment. Or you can make, like I always made, probably 5 or 6 times more things than I needed to make, or more. I just kept making. And other students would make, you know, the 3 required paintings or whatever. And so I just felt like that's my life, you know, just kind of make as much as I can and just stay busy in it and ask all the questions I need to ask about it and just keep pushing it. So I did that in my academic career. And I retired 2 years ago after those 32 years of pleasure and money making and all that kind of stuff. And I continue to think of myself. Well, in fact, it's funny because people ask me about retiring now, you know, do you miss teaching? I do not miss teaching, not one bit. Not a bit. I enjoyed it, and I feel like I inspired kids and did all that stuff, but I do not miss it at all. I really feel like I'm that guy back in Brooklyn again. You know, I've had this 32 years sort of anomaly in my life of teaching, and then now I'm back in Brooklyn just making my art in my studio, so it's a good place to be. So the body of work that I'm showing is, how can I best, I think I'm trying to remember the title of the show, but it's Mythological Landscapes of the Future. Okay, so, and there's a kind of a contradiction in that title because mythology, you always think of the past, and you know, the idea of the future. So to me, this body of work is sort of like thinking, just imagining future life in the world in some way. Like, what will that look like? How will that be? And in many ways, it's a response to the pandemic. It's a response to current politics. It's a response to all kinds of things where I'm sort of imagining a future where it's a utopian future. So they're kind of optimistic utopian visions. But there's also a little bit of dread in them because all the vegetation is kind of gigantic and it's kind of weird and sort of entwining people, entwining the landscape. So they're both fictional landscapes. They're based on observations of the land because I do a lot of drawing and painting out in the, I don't call it plein air, but I'm outside painting and drawing a lot. So they're kind of a combination of observation and just sort of fantasy. They also are kind of in response to the pandemic because I started the pastel drawings during that time of isolation, and I just kind of kept thinking, trying to project life out in the future through these pieces. So They have a narrative component, which is kind of different for me. I'm even using the figure in some of them, which is very different. I mean, figure, I should say, put that in air quotes too. I mean, they're kind of cartoony figures, but that's just how I want to make them. So they're also in response to Wilbur and I, right in the middle of the pandemic, like right at the height of it, we went, it was a February, and there's this place called the Christine Center in Wisconsin. And what it is a bunch of radical nuns started this place that it's like a meditation. They do yoga, they do very un-Catholic sort of things. And I think the Pope even got mad at them at one point. But they have it's called the Christina Center, so they do all kinds of, it's very diverse in its sort of theological influences. And they rent these hermitage houses, so they're basically little cabins in the woods. In the middle of February, like I swear to God, it was like 30 below zero. We rented one of these little cabins, and we were the only people in the whole place. And we just hung out there for about 4 or 5 days, and I did drawings and paintings and read books and stuff. And out of that experience, I started imagining this place like the Christine Center, where there's, you know, little hermitages and people are walking around praying and doing their thing. So that's kind of was an influence on this body of work as well. Some of the pieces, it's really obvious they're in that place. Others, like I started a recent series of waterfall pieces, so it's just these waterfalls that I kind of make up based on observations of real waterfalls in northern Minnesota. So I still fit those into that fictional landscape, though. They're still part of that mythological world, so that I'm creating. So that's kind of pretty much where they're from. The other thing I think is really interesting and kind of, I don't know if it's important or not, but I was a long-time oil painter. And this is the first show I've ever had where there's absolutely no oil painting. I switched to acrylic a couple of years ago for all kinds of reasons, but this is the first time I've ever had a show without any oil paintings. That's kind of funny. In fact, when I started kind of looking into acrylic paint, I didn't even understand the whole open thing. Like, I just didn't get it. And so I was shocked that I had the same kind of experience. It lasts, well, it depends on humidity and stuff, but it lasts quite a while. And you can spray it and cover it, and it's still good, like days later. It's amazing. Yeah. Well, and the color is really rich and beautiful. And one of the other reasons that I think I started using acrylic, it somehow, for some reason, fits with today's sort of Instagram, social media, that whole experience of the world, like bright colors, intense sort of contrast. There's something about the paint and the way I'm using it that fits in with that. And I don't, that's just sort of an intuitive thing. I'm also using fluorescent paint now. I bought a bunch of their fluorescent fluid stuff, and just to kind of juice up the color, and it fits in with that whole idea of our digital lives as well. So there's something about that. Yeah, so I think the other thing about acrylic paint is there's a speediness to it. For a long time I was an encaustic painter, so I mixed my oil with wax, and the way I could build up the layers with that really quickly is very similar to what I can do with acrylic. And so I still have my oil section over there, but man, I'm thinking maybe just getting rid of it and switching all to acrylic. So, and it's just, the other thing about it is I think I draw a lot, and I think it fits my drawing sensibility more than the oil painting does. For some reason I can like draw with it, so.